Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be peeking under the hood, so to speak, of Ferrari and really dissecting their 2023 performance using, their annual report that they just came out with.
It's really an interesting one, and we're going to get into kind of the meat and potatoes of it in a little bit, but I think Ferrari's business is a little more nuanced than people might think.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people, when they think of Ferrari, they think of, the race cars. They think of the kind of, you know, almost unattainable sports car,
Right.
right? Like something that only, the ultra wealthy can even aspire to.
Sure.
But there's a lot more to it than just that.
Absolutely.
So let's get into it, and we'll start with their business segments.
Hmm.
Okay, so we'll start kind of high level, and then we'll go deeper.
Sounds great.
So, yeah, and obviously everyone knows Ferrari for the cars and spare parts, right? That's kind of their bread and butter. But can you kind of give us a little bit more of a breakdown of what that segment actually looks like?
Yeah, you're right. Cars and spare parts are really the core of what they do, but they actually have what they call pillars that they describe in their annual report.
Uh-huh.
And this is almost like a tiered system, right? You have the core range models, which is, I think, what most people think of when they think of Ferrari.
Right, right.
Right. Your everyday, $200,000 Ferrari.
Exactly.
But then they have the ultra exclusive Icona series, and limited edition special series for like collectors.
Wow.
And this kind of tiered approach is pretty brilliant, right? Because they're not just catering to one type of customer, they're
Yeah.
catering to this whole wide spectrum of people who want that Ferrari
And
experience.
from a business perspective, that's got to be a really smart strategy, right?
Yeah.
Because it allows you to maximize profitability. You're not just, selling one type of car to one type of person. You're really able to kind of segment your market and, get the most out of it.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you're hitting on something very interesting. Like you mentioned the word experience, right? They're really not just selling a car, they're selling this whole lifestyle.
Totally. Yeah, it's aspirational.
And they play that up really well.
So it's more than just, sheet metal and an engine. There's a lot more to it.
For sure.
Um, okay, so that's cars and spare parts.
Yep.
But they're also in the engine business in a separate way, right?
Hmm.
They supply engines to Maserati.
Correct. Yeah. So that's a whole separate business segment for them. And actually, it's interesting to note that this segment saw a decrease in revenue in 2023.
Okay. And do they break down why that is? Is there any color in the annual report on that?
They don't really get into specifics,
Mm-hmm.
but it is worth noting that Maserati's sales have been a bit sluggish.
I see.
So that could be a contributing factor.
Yeah, I mean, it raises the question of, is this a blip, right? Or is this kind of a sign of things to come? Is this a segment that Ferrari might need to kind of look at and say, okay,
Yeah.
do we need to diversify beyond Maserati?
Mhm.
Do we need to find other avenues for our engines?
It's definitely a trend to watch.
Totally. Yeah. Okay.
Oh.
So that's engines. Let's move on to a segment where they seem to be absolutely killing it, and that is sponsorship, commercial, and brand.
Mm.
Okay. This is where I think the magic of Ferrari really shines through.
Absolutely. This segment speaks to the brand power that Ferrari has and how they leverage it. You've got revenue from Formula One World Endurance Championship.
And they had that historic win at the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 2023.
Yeah.
I mean, that's got to be a huge marketing coup for them.
Huge.
And it just cements their legacy in motorsports, right?
Sure.
Like, you can't talk about racing without talking about Ferrari.
It's an incredible marketing play.
And it goes beyond racing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you've got brand licensing agreements for watches, clothing. You've got theme parks, museums. I mean, they really are tapping into this whole lifestyle brand.
It's very smart.
And again, it allows them to reach a wider audience than just people who could afford the cars, right?
For sure.
So it's really brilliant. And then there's this other segment, which always kind of makes me laugh because it's like, what is this catch-all category? But it includes things like financial services for car buyers, right? I guess that makes sense. Management of the Mugello racetrack, and then kind of other sports-related activities.
Yeah, it really is a mixed bag.
It is. But it speaks to their diverse range of operations, right? It shows that they're not just a one-trick pony.
For sure, they are exploring new avenues for growth and engagement.
Okay, so we've laid out their business segments. We've kind of got a high-level picture now. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of the financials, all right?
Okay, sounds good.
So where should we start?
Well, the headline here is impressive revenue growth.
Okay.
They really did incredibly well in 2023. Their net revenue hit 5,970 million euros.
Wow. That's a lot of Ferraris.
That is a lot of Ferraris. It's a 17.2% jump from the previous year.
Okay, so what's driving that success?
Well, a lot of it is strong demand for their cars and spare parts.
Okay.
But they also saw significant growth in their sponsorship and commercial activities.
Uh, so that brand strategy that we were talking about earlier is really paying off.
It really is. I mean, the Ferrari mystique translates into serious revenue.
And it makes you wonder, like, how much higher can they take that right? Like, is there a ceiling on that, or can they just keep, building that brand and generating more and more revenue from it?
I mean, that's a great question. And I think something we should keep in mind as we look at the rest of these numbers.
Totally. Okay. So they're growing revenue like crazy, but it's not just about top line growth, right? We need to talk about profitability.
Of course, how efficiently are they turning all that revenue into profit?
Exactly. And how do we assess that? Like, what are the key things we should be looking at?
Well, if we take a peek at their income statement, we'll see their gross profit margin in 2023 was a healthy 52%.
Yeah. Okay, hold on. Let me just stop you there for a second because I think it's important for our listeners to understand, like, what does that actually mean, right? Like, what does a 52% gross profit margin actually mean for Ferrari?
Sure. So basically, it means that for every 100 euros they make selling those cars, they have 52 euros left over after paying for all the costs directly associated with making those cars. So things like materials, labor, all of that.
Got it.
So it really speaks to their pricing power.
Wow. So they're not just selling a lot of cars, they're selling them at a healthy markup.
Exactly.
Um, okay, but obviously there are other costs involved in running a business like Ferrari, right? It's not just about the cost of goods sold. So what about their operating profit margin, which takes into account all those other expenses?
Well, even after you factor in all those other costs, your research and development, your marketing, your administration, all that, their operating profit margin comes in at a very respectable 26.4%.
That is incredibly impressive.
Yeah.
And when you compare that to other industries, that is a really high margin. So what's the secret sauce there?
Well, I would say it's a combination of their pricing power, their efficient operations, their careful cost management. I mean, they're really a well-oiled machine in more ways than one.
Yeah, no pun intended, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so they're generating healthy profits. That's awesome.
Yeah,
But let's talk about cash flow now, because at the end of the day, cash is king.
for sure.
So how efficiently are they managing the money that's flowing in and out of the business?
Well, let's take a look at their cash flow statement.
Okay.
Their operating cash flow for 2023 was 1,314 million euros, which indicates strong cash generation from their core business operations.
But they also invest heavily in research and development, right? I mean, those
Mhm.
cutting edge engines, those designs don't come cheap.
Absolutely. You're right. And in fact, their capital expenditures in 2023 were 788 million euros.
Okay, so they're plowing money back into the business to fuel future growth. But what does that leave them in terms of free cash flow?
Their free cash flow from industrial activities was 526 million euros.
So they're still left with a significant chunk of change, even after investing in their future. That's a really good sign.
It is.
But, we can't forget about debt. We have to talk about debt. Every company has debt. So how much are they carrying, and how does that impact their overall financial health?
So at the end of 2023, they had 2,267 million euros in long-term debt.
Okay, and how does that compare to their equity, for instance? Because, debt in a vacuum doesn't really tell us a whole lot.
That's true. Their debt-to-equity ratio, which is a key metric for assessing financial risk, was 0.59.
Okay, and just so we're clear on that, for our listeners, that means they have 0.59 euros of debt for every 1 euro of equity.
Exactly.
So their debt levels don't seem outrageous given their strong earnings and cash flow.
Yeah, it's a manageable level of debt, especially considering how much cash they're generating.
Totally. Okay,
Okay.
so we've covered a lot of ground here. They're generating impressive revenue profits, managing their cash flow, effectively keeping their debt levels in check. Pretty impressive financial picture.
It is a picture of strength.
But as always, the past doesn't guarantee future performance.
Right, there are always challenges, especially as the automotive landscape evolves.
So let's take a look at how Ferrari is rewarding their shareholders, the people who have invested in their success, because ultimately that's what it's all about, right? Creating shareholder value.
Absolutely. Let's talk about that.
So starting with dividends, what's Ferrari's track record in that area?
They declared a dividend of 2.4443 euros per share for 2023, which totals 440 million euros in payouts.
Okay, and how does that compare to previous years? Has they been pretty consistent with their dividend?
It has fluctuated a little bit over time.
Got it. And what about share buybacks? How active has they been in repurchasing their own shares?
They've been quite active, actually. They repurchased a significant number of shares in 2023.
which suggests that they believe their stock is undervalued.
Exactly.
So it's a way for them to signal confidence in their future prospects. But to understand those prospects fully, we need to delve into their growth strategy and the challenges they face.
Absolutely. And there are some interesting twists and turns ahead for Ferrari. Welcome back to our deep dive on Ferrari. So we left off talking about growth strategy and the challenges that they're facing. So why don't we pick up right there?
Okay, yeah, I mean, they seem to have this pretty ambitious growth strategy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they're also facing some serious headwinds, especially with this, global shift towards electric vehicles.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really pivotal moment for them, right? Because they've built their reputation on these powerful combustion engines.
Right.
So how do they transition to electric while maintaining their brand DNA? That's a tough balancing act.
It really is, and I think it's a challenge that the entire industry is facing. But it's particularly acute for a brand like Ferrari, where, that visceral driving experience, that roar of the engine, is so central to their identity.
You're absolutely right.
It's not just about getting from point A to point B. It's about that feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, and the annual report touches on this. They talk about, gradually but rapidly expanding the use of hybrid and electric technology in their road cars.
Yeah.
And the SF90 Stradale is a perfect example of that, right? It's their first hybrid series production car.
So it seems like they're taking steps in the right direction, but are they fully committed? Like, what's their long-term vision?
That's the big question. And the report doesn't really give us a specific timeline for a fully electric Ferrari.
Okay.
But they are investing heavily in research and development, especially in areas like hybridization and advanced driver assistance systems.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, they can't afford to fall behind in the tech race, but how do they appeal to their core customer base, right?
Right.
These are people who grew up, idolizing those classic Ferrari roars. How do they appeal to them while simultaneously embracing the electric future?
I mean, it's a real tightrope walk, right? You don't want to alienate your loyal fans, but if any brand can pull it off, I think it's probably Ferrari.
Yeah.
I mean, they've consistently pushed the boundaries of engineering and design, and I'm pretty confident they'll find a way to translate that Ferrari magic, into the electric realm.
Yeah, they've always been innovators, so I'm optimistic about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about global expansion.
Okay.
Because right now they're still very reliant on the EU and the United States for their sales.
Yeah, you're right. And they do acknowledge this in the report. They talk about the need to diversify geographically, but expanding into new markets comes with its own set of challenges.
Absolutely. I mean, think about like trying to crack into a market like China.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, the consumer tastes regulations are a lot more complex. There's a lot of competition. I mean, it's not as simple as just showing up and saying, hey, we're Ferrari, but buy our cars.
Not at all. And they're going to need to really tailor their products, their marketing, their overall approach to resonate with consumers in these new markets.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
It is. It requires a deep understanding of local nuances.
And that takes time and money.
And a willingness to adapt.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we've talked about electrification. We've talked about global expansion. And of course, there are those looming economic and macroeconomic risks that we touched on earlier, right? Like the luxury goods sector is always particularly vulnerable to economic downturns.
Absolutely. And the report highlights rising inflation and interest rates as potential challenges. And, we also have to consider all the geopolitical uncertainties in the world right now. Conflicts, trade wars, supply chain disruptions, all of these things can have a real impact on a global luxury brand like Ferrari.
Yeah, it's a lot to juggle.
It is.
But, Ferrari has a track record of resilience, right? They've navigated turbulent times before, and they've come out stronger on the other side.
That's true. I mean, they have a strong brand, loyal customers. They're very good at what they do.
They make great cars.
They make great cars, and it's clear that they're not ignoring these risks. They're taking steps to mitigate them.
So, like, what kind of steps are they taking? Give us some examples.
Well, one area they're focusing on is sustainability. And it's not just about electric vehicles. It's about their entire operation.
Okay.
They've implemented initiatives to reduce their environmental footprint across the board.
Yeah, and that's smart, right? Because today's consumers, especially in the luxury market, they're increasingly aware of a brand's environmental impact. It's not just about the product anymore. It's about the values that the brand represents.
Exactly. And it goes beyond consumer appeal, too. There are also regulatory pressures and potential cost savings associated with sustainability.
So it's a win-win.
It really is.
Another area that they're focusing on is talent recruitment and retention.
Yeah. They're really putting a lot of emphasis on attracting and developing top talent.
And that's essential, right, as they navigate this technological transition.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they need engineers, they need designers with expertise in all these new areas, electrification, software, advanced manufacturing techniques.
Oh, it's not just about technical skills, right?
Right.
I mean, they need people who understand the Ferrari brand, who embody that passion, that pursuit of excellence.
Exactly. They need a team that can drive innovation while preserving those core values that make Ferrari so iconic.
Yeah. It's a delicate balance for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so it seems like Ferrari's aware of the challenges ahead and they're taking steps to address them. But, the million-euro question still remains, are they well positioned for success in the long run?
I think that's what we need to explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We need to weigh the evidence, assess the risks and opportunities, and see if we can answer that question.
Okay, so welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah.
We're in the final stretch of our Ferrari deep dive, and we've, gone through their business model, their financials, their growth strategy, the challenges they face. And now really it all comes down to this, is Ferrari poised for success? Are they going to continue to be this iconic brand, this powerhouse in the automotive industry?
Well, I think they're a fascinating case study, right? I mean, they have this incredible legacy, unparalleled brand recognition, a history of innovation, but they are operating in an industry that's undergoing a major transformation.
Right. Electrification, digitalization, changing consumer preferences. I mean, it's a whole new ballgame out there.
It is.
So let's put on our analyst hats here and really assess their prospects. What are their strengths as we look forward?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, their financials are really strong.
Right.
I mean, you can't argue with the numbers, revenue growth, profitability, cash flow, all incredibly healthy.
And they can command those premium prices.
Absolutely.
Which is huge, right? I mean, not every company can do that.
Not at all. And they have that, passionate, loyal customer base. Yeah, these are people who dream of owning a Ferrari.
Yeah, it's like a lifelong goal for a lot of people.
It is.
And they're not just sitting back and, letting that legacy carry them forward.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
They're expanding their product portfolio. You're investing in R&D. They're addressing sustainability, which I think is huge, especially if you're trying to attract younger buyers.
Yeah, younger, environmentally conscious buyers.
Absolutely.
And let's not forget about their Formula One team.
Right.
That provides a continuous stream of technological innovation and marketing power. I mean, it's just brilliant.
It's a really powerful combination, but, we have to be realistic here. No investment is without risk. So what are some of the concerns that you have as you look at Ferrari moving forward?
Well, I think a key concern is their ability to navigate that EV transition that we talked about while preserving their brand DNA.
Yeah. I mean, will an electric Ferrari have the same soul, the same raw emotional appeal? Can you capture that roar in a silent electric motor?
I mean, that's the big question.
It is.
Can you translate that visceral experience into the electric realm? And it's not just about horsepower and speed. It's about the sound, the feel, the whole sensory experience.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be the challenge for them. Can they crack that code? Can they create an electric car that still feels like a Ferrari?
We'll see.
Another challenge, I think, is global expansion, right?
Yes.
We talked about this earlier, but, entering new markets is complex.
Very complex.
Each region has its own cultural nuances, regulatory hurdles, competitive pressures. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
They can't just assume that their brand prestige will automatically translate into success in these new markets.
Right.
They're going to have to adapt and be really smart about it.
And then, of course, there are those macroeconomic factors that are always kind of looming in the background, right?
Always.
I mean, a recession, soaring energy prices, geopolitical instability, any of those things could have a real impact on demand for luxury goods.
Absolutely a reminder that even the most iconic brands are vulnerable to those external forces.
So where does that leave us? We've talked about the good, the bad, the ugly when it comes to Ferrari. So what's the verdict? Is Ferrari a good bet?
At the end of the day, that's a decision only you as an investor can make.
Right.
We've tried to lay out the facts here, the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, the threats we've given you. That financial x-ray highlighted some of the key areas to consider, but ultimately you have to weigh those risks and rewards.
Right. And decide if Ferrari aligns with your investment goals, and your risk tolerance.
Exactly.
And it's a decision that goes beyond just the financial metrics. You know,
Absolutely.
this is about heritage. It's about innovation. It's about the allure of a brand,
It is.
that represents speed, luxury, the pursuit of automotive perfection.
Yeah.
So, it's a lot more than just numbers on a spreadsheet.
It is.
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job of dissecting Ferrari here today.
I think so too.
And, as always, we encourage our listeners to do their own research.
Absolutely.
Don't just take our word for it.
Yeah.
Cook the tires, so to speak.
Yes.
And, really come to your own conclusions. But we hope that this deep dive has given you a good starting point.
A framework.
A framework, exactly. And, we appreciate you tuning in. And we'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me.